Get to the back, boy. People like you don't sit in 1A Fay. Move now, or I'll have the staff drag you out of my seat.
At 30,000 feet, injustice doesn't whisper, it sits in 1A. The black CEO in a plain red hoodie stops beside his assigned seat, staring at the older blonde woman lounging there as if she owns the cabin. She doesn't even glance at his boarding pass, only at his skin. "Move to the back, boy," she snaps, loud enough for half the plane to hear. Phones rise, record lights blink on, and the quiet luxury of business class turns into a courtroom in the sky. Boarding was almost finished when he stepped into the business class cabin. Warm cabin lights washed over rows of wide gray seats, passengers already settling in with headphones, champagne, and smug little smiles that said, "We made it up here." The black CEO, in a simple red hoodie and dark jeans, moved slowly down the aisle, one hand gripping his leather briefcase with the metal plate engraved D. Cole. He didn't look like the other passengers, in tailored suits and stiff collars, and that was exactly how he wanted it. No entourage, no assistant, no uniformed staff calling him sir, just another traveler heading home. His eyes flicked to the seat numbers, 1C, 1B, then 1A. The air caught in his throat for half a second. Someone was already there. The woman in the seat sat the way people sit in their own living room, not on an airplane. Legs crossed, back slightly reclined, handbag resting on the armrest like a silent claim. She was older, hair cut into a perfect blonde bob that didn't dare move, pearl necklace resting just above the neckline of her cream-colored jacket. Her shoes shone under the cabin light. She scrolled her phone with a bored expression, as if nothing on this aircraft could possibly concern her. He glanced again at his boarding pass. 1A, D. Cole. No mistake. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice even. "I think you're in my seat." She looked up at him for the first time, eyes traveling over the red hoodie, the dark skin, the casual pants. Her gaze didn't even touch the boarding pass in his hand. It slid right past his ticket and landed on his face, like she was scanning for evidence that he didn't belong. Then her mouth tightened. "No, I don't think so," she replied, each word clipped. "This is 1A. They told me this seat was reserved for important passengers." From the row behind, a young white guy in a navy sweater glanced up from his tablet. 2 rows back, an Asian woman paused mid-text and subtly angled her phone camera toward them, pretending to check a message while the lens faced forward. The CEO drew a slow breath. He had promised he would keep things calm when he traveled. No scenes, no shouting, no giving anyone a clip they could twist online. "I understand," he said, holding the ticket where she could see it, "but this is my name, Darius Cole, seat 1A. This time, she didn't even pretend to look. She let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Look, I don't care what's printed on that piece of paper. There must be some mix-up at the counter. Maybe economy is more appropriate?" Her eyes drifted over his clothes again. "You can ask them to move you to the back, boy." The last word came out sharp, like a slap. Silence rippled down the cabin. The young man in the navy sweater froze, his hand hovering above his tablet screen. A businessman across the aisle raised his eyebrows, then quickly dropped his gaze as if afraid to get involved. The woman with the phone adjusted her grip so the camera had a clearer view. Behind Darius, a flight attendant in a crisp, dark uniform stepped forward, smile already in place. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, tone polite but impatient. She looked at the woman in the seat first. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "Yes," the woman said immediately, pointing a manicured finger at him without truly pointing, just enough to make it clear. "They've obviously double-booked this seat. I was told I'd have 1A. He can take something in the back. I'm not moving my things again." The attendant turned to Darius with a practiced, calming smile, reserved for delays and crying babies. "Sir, maybe we can find you another very comfortable seat. The cabin is quite full, but I'm sure there's a solution." Darius felt it again, that old familiar sting he thought he'd left behind years ago. The assumption, the quiet expectation that he'd be the one to yield, to apologize for making things complicated, for existing in the wrong place. He lowered his hand, letting the boarding pass hang by his side. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it carried. "I paid for 1A," he said. "I checked in early. My name is on the ticket, and it matches the manifest. I'm not moving to the back so someone who likes the look of this seat more than I do can keep it." The attendant's smile faltered. She glanced toward the galley as if an invisible supervisor might appear and bail her out. No one came. "Sir," she tried again, "if you could just step aside, we'll sort this out without disturbing the other guests. We don't want to cause a scene." A bitter, tired part of him almost laughed. The scene is already here, he thought. I'm just the one standing in the frame. From somewhere behind, a soft whisper. Did she really just say boy? Another voice, hushed but angry. Man, that's messed up. The Asian woman's phone was now clearly aimed at the trio in row 1. Her thumb hovered over the record button, then pressed down. A tiny red dot glowed on the screen. Darius shifted his grip on the briefcase. His fingers tightened around the handle, leather creaking faintly. He could feel his heart beating harder, but his face stayed calm. He had been here before, in boardrooms, in banks, in quiet offices where people with polite voices told him no in 100 different ways. This time, he decided, he wasn't going to shrink. Not on his own airline, not in front of a cabin full of strangers who'd forget his name but remember his silence. He straightened, met the flight attendant's eyes, then the woman's. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not to the back, not to another seat, not this time." The engines outside rumbled to life, but inside the cabin, everything felt suspended, as if the entire plane was waiting to see whether he would sit down or give in. Hours earlier, the airport had looked like every other airport in his memory, bright, loud, and full of people rushing nowhere as fast as they could. Darius rolled his carry-on across the polished floor, hoodie sleeves pushed up, leather briefcase in his other hand. Overhead screens flashed delays and departures. Announcements crackled about security checks and missing passengers. He joined the premium check-in line, the one marked with a gold sign, Business and First Class, Priority. 2 flight attendants chatted near the counter, eyes drifting over the queue. When they landed on him, the conversation slowed for a beat, then picked up again with a different tone, lighter, slightly forced. He'd heard that tone his entire life. At the front, a young agent with perfect hair and a practiced smile waved him forward. Her name tag read Sophie. "Good afternoon, sir. Economy check-in is just down there," she said, pointing to the long, noisy line a few yards away. The words were polite, the assumption wasn't. Darius let the briefcase rest beside his leg. "I'm in the right place," he replied calmly. "Business class, flight 742 to New York." He slid his passport and confirmation code across the counter. Sophie's smile held, but something in her eyes tightened. She typed the code in, glancing up at him again as if still expecting the system to prove her correct. When the booking appeared, her expression shifted for a fraction of a second. Surprise, then a quick attempt to smooth it away. "Oh, yes, I see." She cleared her throat. "You're Mr. Cole, and you're in 1A?" The way she said it sounded less like information and more like a question aimed at the computer. Darius watched her, saying nothing. "That's correct," he said after a beat. "Is there an issue?" No, of course not." Her fingers flew over the keyboard again, clicking harder than necessary. "We just don't usually. 1A is often reserved for our elite partners and VIPs. She forced a laugh. "Very special seat." He didn't bother explaining that he owned the airline. That was the point of this trip, to walk through his own system like a stranger and see what it did to people like him. Sophie printed the boarding pass, then hesitated before handing it over. "You know, there are some really nice upgrades in premium economy," she said lightly. "Extra legroom, very comfortable. Sometimes our guests prefer that to the formality of the front row. Darius blinked once. Are you offering me an upgrade, he asked, or a downgrade? Color crept into her cheeks. Oh, no, sir, I didn't mean it that way. She cut herself off. Never mind, here you go. She slid the boarding pass toward him with a tight smile. Behind him, someone in line sighed loudly, annoyed at the delay. A businessman with a silver tie muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Darius to catch. Can we move this along? Darius picked up his passport and ticket. The bold print at the top read, Cole/Darius, Seat 1A, Business Class. No ambiguity, no confusion, just facts. Have a great flight, Sophie said, already motioning the next passenger forward. He turned away, but the moment clung to him like static. Not the worst encounter he'd had, not by a long shot. No one had shouted at him, no one had used slurs. It was the quieter thing underneath, the reflex to send him to the back, to assume he couldn't possibly belong where the gold signs and short lines lived. As he walked towards security, he thought of his mother standing at a bus stop years ago, holding his hand so tight his fingers hurt. The driver back then had told them to wait for the next bus. This one was full, though Darius had seen empty seats. His mother had swallowed her anger because they needed to get home. He had learned a different lesson.
Now, decades later, he passed through the priority security lane, shoes off, laptop out, the system humming around him. He watched every interaction with the quiet focus of a man inspecting a house he'd built, checking for leaks no one wanted to admit were there. By the time he reached the gate, the earlier slight at check-in had faded to a dull ache, filed under the usual. He glanced down at his boarding pass one more time, 1A, and decided that today, if anyone tried to nudge him backward, he was done pretending it didn't matter. Hours later, standing in front of that same seat with a woman glaring up at him like an intruder, he realized the test had come sooner and louder than he'd planned. For a second, standing in the aisle with the woman's words still hanging in the air, Darius wasn't in row 1 anymore. He was back on a cracked sidewalk in a neighborhood that never saw tourists, watching buses roar past and wondering why some doors stayed shut no matter how hard you knocked. He had grown up under flight paths. Jets screamed overhead all day, white trails cutting across the sky while his mother folded laundry by the window. One day you'll be on one of those, she used to say, half joke, half prophecy. Back then, flying felt like something other people did. People on posters, people in suits, people whose names were printed on things that cost more than 1 month of rent. In school, guidance counselors didn't tell him to dream about owning an airline. They told him to be realistic. Work hard, sure, get a job, of course, but don't ask for too much. Don't expect to sit in the front. The first time he flew, he hadn't been in the front at all. He'd been squeezed into a middle seat in the last row, next to the bathroom, on a cheap ticket for a college interview. The air had smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Every bump of turbulence had rattled his bones. But when the plane lifted off, when the wheels left the ground, he'd felt something fierce and electric in his chest. Someone owned this metal bird. Someone signed paychecks for the crew, chose routes, approved every detail. The world he lived in ran on systems like this, massive, invisible, controlled by people who would never sit next to him on a bus. He decided he was going to be one of those people. Not just a passenger, not just a frequent flyer with a shiny card, the person behind the logo. The road from that middle seat to the boardroom looked nothing like a straight line. He stocked shelves, worked night shifts, studied on lunch breaks. He took the jobs that were available, then fought for the ones that weren't. He learned how to read balance sheets the way other people read sports scores. He understood that the world didn't hand out power. It hid it inside contracts and policy manuals and shareholder meetings. When he finally stepped into the aviation world, it was through a side door, logistics consulting, then small equity positions in struggling regional carriers. He didn't flash his face in ads. He didn't need billboards. He wanted leverage.
Years later, when the opportunity came to buy into a failing airline with old planes and worse reputation, everyone told him it was a bad bet. He ran the numbers himself. Where others saw rust, he saw routes. Where they saw a doomed brand, he saw a blank canvas. He put almost everything on the line. The deal closed on a gray Tuesday morning. By Thursday, he was in a tiny conference room with a handful of executives who didn't quite know what to make of the man who now signed their paychecks. One of them had actually asked, half joking, "So you're the new face of the company?" He'd smiled then, a small, flat smile. "No," he'd replied. "I'm the spine. The face is whoever sits in 14C with a crying baby and still chooses to fly with us next time." He'd meant it. That was why he fought to overhaul training, to rewrite manuals, to push for policies that protected passengers first. "We're not just hauling bodies from A to B," he'd told them. "We're carrying stories. Some of those stories belong to people like me. They deserve to arrive with their dignity intact." Which was exactly why he was here now in a red hoodie, holding a boarding pass like any other traveler. No VIP escort, no quiet phone call to the gate staff telling them to roll out a carpet. He'd slipped into his own system to see how it treated a black man with no visible armor of status. And the system was answering. It had answered at check-in with assumptions disguised as politeness. It was answering now, in row 1, through a woman who believed the seat belonged to important passengers and couldn't imagine he might be one of them. Through a flight attendant more worried about a scene than about the insult someone had delivered in her cabin. Darius felt the weight of his briefcase in his hand, the familiar drag of leather and metal. Inside were contracts, performance reports, the blueprint for a company he had dragged from the edge of bankruptcy. On the outside, all they saw was a black man in a hoodie standing where they didn't think he should stand. He thought of calling the whole thing off, of smiling, stepping back, making a joke, taking another seat. It would be easier. It was always easier to swallow it, to let the moment pass, to pretend nothing had happened so everyone else stayed comfortable. But his mother's voice rose up in his memory, low and tired, the night she'd told him, "I can't fight them all, baby, but maybe one day you can fight some." So he stayed where he was, in 1A, in the middle of a test he had designed without knowing exactly how painful the questions would be. The aisle felt narrower as more eyes turned toward them. Overhead bins slammed shut one by one, the shapeless murmur of boarding fading into pockets of silence around row 1. The woman in 1A shifted slightly, angling her shoulder toward the window as if to block the seat with her body. "I already told you," she said, voice sharper now. "They promised me 1A. I was very clear at the counter. I'm not moving because he walked in late and decided he wants this spot." Darius glanced at his watch. He wasn't late. Boarding wasn't even closed. "I boarded in Group 1, he replied, keeping his tone level. "Just like my ticket says. And this is the seat I paid for. I'm not here to take anything from you, ma'am. I'm just asking you to respect the assignment on the boarding pass." The flight attendant, her name tag read M. Turner, let out a breath through her nose, the kind people use right before saying, "Let's just be reasonable." She stepped a little closer to the woman, resting a hand lightly on the headrest, as if offering quiet support. "Ma'am," Turner said gently, "I understand this is frustrating. Let me check with the gate about the seating. We'll get it cleared up." Then she turned to Darius. The warmth dropped half a degree. "Sir, if you could just step back to the galley area for a moment, we'll sort it out quicker without blocking the aisle." He didn't move. "If the system says I'm in 1A, Darius replied, "I'd like that checked right here. You have tablets, you have the manifest. We don't need to move this conversation out of sight." A small stir passed through the first few rows. The young man in the navy sweater set his tablet aside completely now, watching openly. The Asian woman's phone was no longer pretending to hide. She propped her elbow on the armrest, screen angled squarely at the trio. A couple in 2C and 2D exchanged a look that said, "We should stay out of this," and then stared straight ahead, overcorrecting so hard it became obvious. Turner pressed her lips together. "Sir, I'm just trying to de-escalate." "So am I," Darius cut in quietly. "That's why I'm not raising my voice. That's why I'm not cursing.
I'm asking for the same thing she's getting, your patience and your effort to verify the facts." The woman in 1A gave a short, incredulous snort. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "This is ridiculous. You people always want to make everything about some kind of injustice." She waved a hand in the air, searching for a word that wouldn't sound as bad as the one she was thinking. "I fly this airline all the time. I am a loyal customer. They know me. They know what I paid for. He obviously bought something cheap and thinks he can sweet talk or bully his way up here." Several heads turned at "you people." Turner's posture stiffened, but she didn't address the phrase. She tamped down a sigh and tapped on the cabin tablet hanging by the bulkhead, fingers moving more nervously now. Darius watched her eyes scan the screen. "Okay," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Seat 1A, Flight 742. Passenger name." Her brows lifted for a split second. "Mr. Cole." She swallowed. "Ma'am," she said to the woman, "the system is showing 1A assigned to Mr. Darius Cole." The woman in 1A went very still. For a fleeting moment she looked unsure. Then her face hardened again, like wet cement setting fast. "Well, then the system is wrong," she said crisply. "I was in the airport for 2 hours sorting my ticket. The agent told me I would be in the front. You can't just move me to give him an upgrade. Do you have any idea how much I travel, how much I spend with this airline?" The word "him" hung there, heavy and obvious. Turner shifted her weight, trapped between the tablet's information and the customer's fury. She glanced at Darius. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice softer, trying to coax her into compliance, "we definitely value your business as well, but the flight is full. If I move her now and there's been a misunderstanding at the gate, it could cause a delay for everyone. Maybe, just for this one flight, you could accept a seat in the second row. It's almost the same experience." "You're asking the paying passenger of 1A to leave 1A because the person sitting in it is louder?" M. Turner flushed.
"I'm asking you to help us keep the peace, sir." "The peace didn't shatter when I walked in," he replied. "It cracked when she looked at my skin and told me to go to the back of the plane." That sentence landed like a dropped tray. Somewhere behind them, someone made a choking sound that might have been a half laugh, half gasp. The young man in navy whispered, "He's right," under his breath, forgetting how microphones, human and digital, worked in closed spaces. The woman in 1A shot up straighter in her seat. "I never said anything about his skin," she snapped. "Don't twist my words. I just know when someone is trying to sit where they don't belong." Darius tilted his head. "Where is it exactly that I belong, ma'am?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked past him, appealing to the cabin around her. "Do you all want to sit on this runway while he argues?" she demanded. "I have a connection. I don't have time for this drama." Nobody answered, but phones didn't lower. If anything, a few lifted a bit higher. Turner seemed to feel the weight of all those silent witnesses. Her voice lost some of its practiced smoothness. "I'm going to call the purser," she said. "We'll get this resolved. Sir, please, just step back to the galley while we do that." "No," Darius said, his tone still calm but unmovable. "If you're making decisions about my seat, I'll be right here to hear every word." For the first time, Turner looked genuinely unsettled. She tapped her intercom button. "Captain, this is M. Turner in the cabin. We have a seating dispute involving 1A. I recommend we hold boarding for a minute." There it was, that last word she'd tried to avoid. Dispute. Not a glitch, not a clerical error, a conflict. All because one man refused to quietly trade his place in the front for someone else's comfort. As the announcement echoed faintly through the speakers, the engines powered down a notch. The sense of forward motion stalled. Darius stayed where he was, boarding pass in hand, feeling the plane itself pause to see which way this would tilt. The purser arrived like a judge walking into a crowded courtroom. Every conversation dropped to a whisper, then to nothing. He was tall, uniform pressed to perfection, silver wings pinned over his chest. His name tag read J. Harris. "What seems to be the issue?"
Harris asked, his voice calm, carrying just enough authority to remind everyone who ran this cabin. He looked first at Turner, then at the woman in 1A, and only lastly at Darius, as if following an invisible hierarchy. Turner straightened. "We have a dispute over seat 1A, sir. The system shows Mr. Cole assigned to it, but the passenger currently in the seat insists she was promised this position by the ground staff. I was trying to move Mr. Cole to another seat to avoid delay." The phrasing was neat, almost surgical. It left out the "move to the back, boy" and the "you people." It left out the part where the wound had been opened. Darius felt a hollow laugh scratching at his throat. Of course, by the time the story reached the person with more stripes on their sleeve, the ugliness had been scrubbed out, polished into something unfortunate but neutral. Harris nodded slowly, then turned to the woman. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. Could you please confirm how your seat was assigned?" She arranged her features into a look of weary martyrdom. "I spent over an hour at the counter," she said. "They told me I would be in the front row. I fly this airline every month. I have status. I can't be shuffled around like luggage because someone else wants my seat." The word status slid into the air like a key. Harris's eyes flickered with recognition. "You're a frequent flyer with us?" "Platinum," she answered quickly. "Check the system." He did. The tablet blinked in his hand, reflecting off the polished metal edge of the bulkhead. "Yes," he confirmed, "I see that. And Mr. Cole," he paused, thumb moving over the screen. "You also have a premium tier." His tone suggested it was less familiar. Darius watched him carefully. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "Just the seat I purchased, seat 1A, the one your system assigned to me, the one I boarded with." Harris shifted his weight, clearly aware of the phones pointing at them now. "We seem to have a miscommunication with the gate," he said. "Sometimes they make verbal promises that don't match the final seat map. It's unfortunate when that happens." "That's not what this is," Darius replied quietly. Harris glanced up, eyes sharpening. "Sir, with all due respect, we're trying to avoid a delay. The simplest solution is to reseat one passenger. We have a very comfortable bulkhead seat in row 2 that I can offer you, along with a complimentary voucher for future travel." There it was, the soft bribe, a shiny bandage for a deeper cut. Darius could feel the cabin waiting. If he took it, the tension would disperse. The woman would keep her stolen throne. The airline would have a neat record. Guest accommodated, minor issue resolved. He thought of his staff, the people who wore this uniform every day and tried to do the right thing with whatever training they had been given. He thought of the policies he'd approved, the ones about inclusion, respect, non-discrimination. On paper, they looked beautiful. In this moment, they were just paper. "Why me?" Darius asked softly. "Why not offer her that very comfortable seat in row 2? The question hung there, heavier than the voucher. Harris's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because she was seated first, sir," he answered, "and moving her would be more disruptive." "To whom?" Darius asked. "To the schedule, or to the idea that someone who looks like me might actually belong in 1A? A slow, uneasy rustle moved through the surrounding rows. The young man in navy nodded, almost involuntarily. The Asian woman behind them murmured, "He's right," under her breath. The words barely louder than a breath, but captured forever by her recording. Harris inhaled, exhaled, the way people do when they're counting to 3 behind their eyes. "Mr. Cole," he said, dipping his voice so only the first row could clearly hear. "We're doing our best in a difficult situation. I am asking you, as a courtesy, to help us keep this flight on time." Darius looked at him steadily. "And I'm asking you," he replied, equally quiet, "to enforce the seat assignments your own system created, instead of rewarding someone for shouting the loudest. If I accept being pushed back today, someone else like me will be pushed back tomorrow. Maybe they won't have a camera pointing at them. Maybe no one will hear it when they're told to go to the back." Something shifted in Harris's expression then. Not agreement, not yet, but the faint recognition that this was bigger than a seat, bigger than a voucher.
bigger than his desire to push back from the gate on time. From the doorway, another voice cut through the charged air. "Is there a problem up here?" The captain stood just outside the cockpit, cap tucked under one arm, eyes scanning the small tableau at the front of the cabin. The pilot rarely stepped out for this kind of thing. The fact that he had meant one thing: the dispute had officially become a situation. Captain Reynolds didn't raise his voice, but the cabin seemed to lean toward him anyway. Years of flying had carved quiet authority into his posture. He took in the scene quickly. The woman gripping the armrests in 1A, the stiff-backed purser, the flight attendant hovering, the black man in the red hoodie standing in the aisle with a boarding pass in his hand and a briefcase at his feet. "Captain, we have a disagreement about seat 1A, Harris began. "The manifest shows Mr. Cole assigned to it, but this passenger believes—" "I don't believe," the woman cut in. "I was told, at the counter. I am platinum. I have never been treated like this by your airline." Reynolds's eyes flicked to her for a moment, then to Darius. "And you are?" "Darius Cole," he answered simply. "My ticket says 1A. Your system confirmed it in front of your crew. I've been asked twice now to move to the back or to another seat so she can stay where she decided to sit." A rustle of fabric and whispers passed through rows 2 and 3. The young man in the navy sweater had his phone up now, no pretense. The red recording icon glowed on his screen. A teenage girl across the aisle whispered to her mother, "Mom, this is going to go viral," earning a sharp shush that came too late. Reynolds noticed the phones. His jaw tightened. This was no longer just about a manifest. This was about optics, headlines, and whatever story the internet would decide to tell while they were still in the air. "Mr. Harris," the captain said, not taking his eyes off Darius, "who does the seat map show in 1A? "Mr. Cole," the purser admitted, tablet held like evidence. "And who scanned boarding for 1A at the door?" Turner checked the device clipped at the bulkhead. "Also Mr. Cole, Captain." Reynolds nodded once. The facts were not in dispute, only the outcome. "Ma'am," he said, turning fully to the woman in 1A, "it appears there has been a misunderstanding with the ground staff. But based on our system, this seat belongs to Mr. Cole." Her face flushed, then blanched. "You can't be serious," she said. "You expect me to gather my things like some economy passenger who snuck up here? I was assured I'd be in the front row. I paid for it. I have status. Look at him." She caught herself, swallowed, then forced the sentence to bend. "He doesn't even look like he flies up here often." Someone in 2D let out a disbelieving laugh. A middle-aged black woman by the window shook her head slowly and said, low but audible, "There it is." Phones edged higher. A man in a suit 3 rows back started muttering legal phrases, hostile environment, document everything, as if building a case in his head. Reynolds felt the pressure from all sides, from the schedule, from corporate, from the unblinking camera lenses.
He defaulted to the instinct that had served him in turbulence: stabilize first, sort details second. "We're not going to make judgments about who looks like they belong in any seat," he said. "We go by the manifest." "Then fix the manifest," she snapped. "Give him something else. I am not moving. I have a connection. I have a meeting." "And he doesn't?" the woman in the window seat asked softly, speaking up for the first time. "You think his time is worth less than yours?" The question seemed to surprise even herself. She looked down quickly, but it was too late. The line was recorded, captured, already part of the narrative. Darius said nothing. He could feel everyone waiting for him to explode, to rant, to give them the stereotype they'd already half-written in their heads. Instead, he drew in a measured breath. "I'm not interested in a scene," he said, voice steady. "I'm interested in a simple principle. If you can let someone take what another person paid for just because they sit down first and shout the loudest, then every policy you post on your website is just decoration." The teenage girl's thumbs flew over her screen, adding a caption to the video. "He's right." Reynolds looked at him more closely now, a faint question forming behind his eyes. There was something in Darius's calm that didn't feel like ordinary outrage. It felt practiced, tempered, like a man who had sat at too many tables where he was underestimated. "Captain," Harris said quietly, "we're burning time." "I'm aware," Reynolds replied. He hesitated, then asked Darius, "Sir, do you have any documentation beyond the boarding pass? An email confirmation? A receipt?" Darius almost smiled. Documentation? As if the system that bore his signature might argue with him. Still, he slid his phone from his pocket, thumbed to the itinerary, and held it out. Behind them, a voice called out from row 3, edged with impatience, but surprisingly on his side. "Captain, with respect, the man's done everything right. Maybe the airline should take the delay instead of asking him to take the hit." Reynolds took in the row of watching faces, the cameras, the tension buzzing in the recycled air. Whatever decision he made now wouldn't just live in the cabin, it would live online. And Darius, feeling that turning point, understood that part 2 of his secret audit had just begun. Because this wasn't only about a seat anymore. It was about who, in this flying microcosm of his company, would stand up when everyone was watching. The captain handed his phone back. "Your documentation matches our system," Reynolds said. "You are the assigned passenger for 1A." It should have been the end of it, a simple sentence, a simple correction. But the woman in the seat only dug in deeper. "I don't care what your computer says," she shot back. "I am not moving. If he wants to play victim, he can do it from row 2, or the back. I'm staying here." The word victim landed like a slap. Darius felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his hands loose at his sides. "I'm not a victim," he said. "I'm a customer. A paying customer being asked to give up what he bought so you don't have to face the fact that you sat where you shouldn't have." Turner shifted, clearly wishing she were somewhere else. Harris looked between them and the captain, waiting for a decision that would let him exhale. "Sir," Harris tried again, voice low and urgent, "if you don't agree to move, the captain may have to delay departure. That affects everyone. I understand your frustration, but there are a lot of people on this plane who just want to get where they're going." Darius turned slightly, letting his gaze move down the cabin. "So do I," he said. "But I'm done paying on behalf of other people's comfort. Every time someone like me is told to just let it go for the sake of the schedule, we teach this system the same lesson, that it can mistreat us and will fix it quietly." A low murmur of agreement rolled through a few rows. The middle-aged black woman by the window nodded. The young man in navy spoke up, louder this time. "He's right," he said. "You guys scanned his ticket. It's his seat. Why is this even a debate?" A man in a suit behind him frowned. "Can we not turn this into a protest?" he muttered. "Some of us have meetings." "Then maybe your meeting can survive you watching fairness for 5 minutes," the Asian woman replied without looking up from her screen. Reynolds held up a hand. "Everyone, please, let the crew handle this." But even he sounded like he knew the illusion of quiet control had cracked. Darius looked back at him. "Captain, I respect the difficulty of your job," he said. "I know delays are expensive. But sometimes the cost of not delaying is higher. You can push this flight out on time and teach your staff that the easiest route is to pressure the person who was wronged. Or you can take a few minutes and show them that the rules mean something, even when it's inconvenient." It was the kind of sentence he used in boardrooms, stripped of jargon, sharpened to a point. Reynolds seemed to feel that edge. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he asked. "I'm asking you not to ask me again to move," Darius replied. "If there's a decision to be made now, it's between your policies and her refusal to follow them. I'm done being the variable you adjust." The woman in 1A let out a harsh laugh. "So what? You're going to hold an entire plane hostage because your ego can't handle sitting in row 2? "No," Darius said. His voice didn't rise. It dropped, steady and cold. "I'm going to stop letting people push me backwards and call it cooperation." He bent briefly to set his briefcase upright, then straightened and pulled his phone out again. His thumb hovered over a contact labeled simply Ops Director.
Reynolds saw the name on the screen and his eyes narrowed, just a fraction. Harris noticed it too and swallowed. "Sir, there's no need to involve corporate," Harris started. "There very much is," Darius answered. "Because what's happening here isn't just a bad seating moment. It's a live demonstration of how my own company handles bias under pressure." He hit the call button. The ringtone pulsed softly against the hush of the cabin. A few rows back, someone whispered, "Oh, this is gonna be good," and immediately regretted saying it out loud. On the third ring, a crisp voice answered. "Operations, this is Linda." "Linda," Darius said, eyes still on the captain, "this is Darius Cole on Flight 742. I'm in the business cabin, and I need you to pull up the seat assignment for 1A while you're on the line." There was a pause, then a shift in her tone, respectful, startled. "Yes, Mr. Cole, one moment." Reynolds and Harris exchanged a quick look. Turner's face paled slightly. Darius didn't explain who he was to the cabin. He didn't need to, not yet. All he wanted in this moment was for the people who worked under his logo to hear themselves reflected back by someone who knew exactly how the system was supposed to function. As the silence stretched and Linda typed on the other end, the whole front of the plane seemed to hold its breath, suspended between the way things had always been done and whatever was about to happen next. "Okay, I have the manifest here," Linda's voice came through, clear enough for the passengers in the first row to hear if they were listening. "Flight 742, New York, business cabin, seat 1A, assigned to Mr. Darius Cole. Checked in, boarding scanned, status confirmed." A few heads snapped up at the sound of his full name. Harris stiffened. Turner's eyes widened just a fraction, like a puzzle piece had just dropped into place. "Thank you," Darius said. "Stay on the line a moment." He tapped the speaker icon with his thumb. The soft click as it engaged felt louder than the engine hum. Now Linda's voice belonged to the whole front cabin, not just him. "Mr. Cole," she said, suddenly aware her words were traveling farther than she expected, "is there a problem on board?" The woman in 1A huffed. "The problem," she announced, as if joining a conference call she owned, "is that your system is wrong and your staff is trying to give my seat to someone else. I was promised 1A. There was a brief, delicate pause. You could almost hear Linda choose her next sentence. "Our system is not wrong about seat assignments, ma'am," she replied. "If it shows Mr. Cole in 1A, then 1A belongs to Mr. Cole. That would be our official position." A low murmur rippled through row 2. The teenage girl's eyes sparkled behind her phone. The middle-aged black woman leaned back, a small, grim smile tugging at her mouth. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Linda," he said, stepping into the audio space, "this is Captain Reynolds. We're trying to resolve a seating dispute without delaying departure. One of the passengers is refusing to vacate 1A despite the manifest." "Understood, Captain," she answered, "but from operations standpoint, there is no dispute. The seat was sold to and assigned to Mr. Cole. Any deviation should be treated as a service failure on our part, not his." Harris shifted uneasily. The neat corporate phrasing, service failure, suddenly made the cabin feel like an exhibit in a training video. "Mr. Cole," Linda added, "do you want me to escalate this to higher leadership?" Darius let the question hang. Reynolds was watching him closely now, brow furrowed. There was no sarcasm in the captain's gaze, only a growing suspicion that the man in the red hoodie was more than an ordinary disgruntled customer. "That won't be necessary yet," Darius said. "What I want is for your team up here to hear how this sounds from the ground. And for the record, the issue isn't just the seat. It's what I was told to do when I showed up to claim it." Phones tilted in, angling for the sound. Somewhere behind him, the businessman in the suit muttered, "This is definitely going to the news." Linda's tone sharpened. "What were you told, sir?"
Darius didn't look away from the woman in 1A as he answered. "I was told to move to the back," he said, "after she looked at my hoodie, at my skin, and decided I didn't belong in the front. Twice now, your staff have asked me to give up my seat so she wouldn't be upset." A beat of silence. The words, "my skin," hung in the recycled air like a warning flare. On the phone, paper rustled, Linda taking notes or imagining headlines. "Understood," she said slowly. I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Cole. This is not in line with our training or company values. The woman in 1A scoffed. Oh, come on. Now we're playing the race card? I just wanted the seat I was promised. He's the one making this dramatic. No one had to make it dramatic, Darius replied evenly. All you had to do was stand up when you learned the seat wasn't yours. Her cheeks flushed, anger burning through the layer of entitlement she'd worn like perfume. You think you can talk to me like that because you made one phone call? I don't care who you are. That, Linda said from the speaker, voice cooling, might be something you want to reconsider, ma'am. The cabin stilled. Even the overhead bins seemed to stop vibrating. Reynolds straightened. Linda, he said carefully, is there additional context we should be aware of? There was another brief pause, the kind where professional people weigh confidentiality against catastrophe. Captain, she answered, I would advise you to treat Mr. Cole's experience on this flight as highly sensitive. His perspective on how this is handled will have serious implications for us. The words didn't say, he's your boss, but the implication was there, pulsing at the edges. Harris's eyes widened. Turner swallowed hard. The young man in navy mouthed, oh damn, to no one in particular. Darius let it rise and settle. He hadn't called to pull rank. He had called to force the system to listen to itself. But now that the hint was out there, he couldn't stuff it back into the phone. Linda, he said, for now, all I'm asking is this. Confirm one last time, on speaker, so everyone can hear it clearly. Who does seat 1A belong to? She didn't hesitate. Seat 1A belongs to Mr. Darius Cole, she said. Any crew member or passenger preventing him from sitting there is in violation of policy. And if he chooses to file a report, this incident will be reviewed at the highest level. The sentence landed like a gavel strike. Darius tapped the speaker off and ended the call. The little phone screen went dark, but the echo of Linda's words stayed, hanging over row 1 like a verdict. He looked at the captain, then at Harris, then finally at the woman still dug into the cushions of 1A. Now, he said quietly, we all know exactly where we stand. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of the air system and the occasional clink of glass from the galley. The woman in 1A gripped the armrests, so tightly the tendons in her hands stood out, knuckles pale against the dark leather. This is absurd, she said finally, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and fear. You can't threaten me with policy just because he made one dramatic phone call. I don't care who he thinks he is. I'm not budging. Harris opened his mouth, closed it again. Turner stared at a fixed point on the bulkhead, as if wishing she could vanish into it. The captain's gaze flicked to the now dark phone in Darius's hand, the way you look at a bomb after it's already gone off. Mr. Cole, Reynolds said carefully, for my crew's clarity, could you tell us what role you hold with this airline? It was a simple question, but it felt like someone had pulled back a curtain. Every phone tilted in a fraction closer. Even the passengers who'd tried to pretend they weren't watching leaned in now, their curiosity stronger than their discomfort. Darius hadn't planned to say it. Not today. Not like this. The whole point of the red hoodie, of walking through his own operation unannounced, had been to see what happened when no one knew his name. But they'd asked. And if he kept dodging, the crew would cling to the thin excuse of ignorance long after this flight landed. He slid the phone into his pocket and met the captain's eyes. I'm the chief executive officer, he said quietly, majority owner, the one who signs off on your budgets, your training programs, your annual reports, and the policies your colleague just quoted. The words were soft, but they hit like turbulence. The teenage girl in row 3 mouthed, "No way!" The businessman in the suit blinked hard, as if recalculating every assumption he'd made since boarding. The middle-aged black woman let out a low, almost disbelieving laugh. Turner's hand dropped from the bulkhead. Sir, I didn't realize. That was the experiment, Darius said. I wanted to see how my own company treats a black man in a hoodie when no one's told you to roll out a rug.
Harris swallowed, color draining from his face. Mr. Cole, if we had known... You didn't need to know,
Darius cut in, not harshly but with no room to wriggle. The way you treat the least visible customer is the truth. Everything else is theater. The woman in 1A stared at him, stunned, her mouth slightly open. "You're lying," she said, but the conviction had drained out of her voice. "You're just saying that to scare me. If you were really—" "Ma'am," Reynolds interrupted, his tone suddenly formal, "I've seen Mr. Cole's name on the corporate memos for years. He's not lying." A visible shudder ran through her shoulders. She looked around, as if expecting someone to rescue her from the reality she'd built with her own words. "So what?" she tried, grasping at the last defense she had left. "Because he's your boss, I'm the villain now? I didn't know who he was. You knew enough," the woman by the window said quietly. "You knew he was black, and you knew his seat was more negotiable than yours." Silence rolled through the cabin again, heavier now, weighted with the knowledge that this wasn't just about a misclick or a rude passenger. It was about the gap between the company's glossy promise and the live demo playing out at 30,000 feet. Reynolds straightened, decision finally settling on his shoulders. "Ma'am," he said to the woman in 1A, "you were informed that this seat does not belong to you. You refused to move. You used language that does not align with our standards toward another passenger. You now know that passenger is not only the rightful occupant of the seat, but also the CEO of this airline." He paused, letting the last part sink in. "At this point, you have two choices. Voluntarily move to the alternate business seat we're offering, or refuse, at which point I will have to consider you non-compliant and remove you from this flight altogether. That's not about status, that's about safety and policy." Her jaw trembled. For the first time, real fear edged out her indignation. Not fear of him, but of consequences. "You'd kick me off the plane for him?" she whispered. "No," Reynolds replied, "for what you did. He just refused to make himself small enough to erase it." The cameras caught everything, her shock, the captain's resolve, the CEO in the red hoodie, standing there, not triumphant, just tired. In a few hours, the world would see this moment on their screens. Right now, though, it belonged to the people in that cabin and the woman in 1A who finally realized there was only one way this ended, with her standing up. For a long moment, the woman in 1A didn't move. Her eyes shone with something brittle, a mix of outrage and humiliation, as if the cabin lights themselves were accusing her. "This is unreal," she said, her voice thinner now. "I've flown with you for years. I spend thousands of dollars. And you're really going to throw me off this plane because some executive decided to play undercover boss?" Darius didn't answer. He didn't trust what might slip out if he did. His heartbeat had slowed now, leaving behind a quiet exhaustion. He hadn't wanted this to become a spectacle, but it had, and not because of him. Reynolds kept his tone even. "We're not removing you because of who he is," he replied. "We're responding to what you did. This would be the same for any passenger who refused multiple crew instructions and verbally targeted someone over where you thought they belonged." Her gaze darted around the cabin, looking for allies. The businessman in the suit suddenly found the safety card fascinating. The teenage girl didn't lower her phone. The middle-aged woman by the window met her eyes for a heartbeat, then calmly looked away. "Ma'am," Harris stepped in now, voice professional but firmer than before. "We have an alternate business class seat on the next flight. We'll rebook you at the gate, provide lounge access, and arrange for your connection to be protected as best we can. But we cannot depart until you comply with the captain's instructions." "You're humiliating me," she whispered. Darius almost said, "Now you know how it feels to be told to go to the back in front of a plane full of strangers." But he swallowed the line. He wasn't here for revenge, or at least he told himself he wasn't. Instead, he said, quietly, "No one forced you to say what you said." Something in her posture collapsed then. Not a graceful surrender, but the slackness of someone whose excuses had finally run out. She unclasped her seatbelt with a sharp click. The metallic sound sliced through the hush. "Fine," she snapped. "If this airline values optics over loyal customers, you can fly with him instead of me." She snatched her handbag, shoved her feet back into her shoes, and stood.
For a second, she loomed over Darius, close enough that he could see the tremble at the corner of her mouth. "You enjoy your little victory," she said, voice barely above a hiss. "But don't pretend this is about principle. Men like you love power just as much as anyone else." Darius met her stare. "Maybe," he said.
But men like me are used to having to earn it twice and justify it forever. Today, I'm just asking to keep what I paid for." She made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a choked-off retort, then turned away. Harris gestured down the aisle. Turner walked ahead of them, clearing a path as they moved toward the front door. As she passed row 2, the Asian woman lowered her phone for the first time and said, quietly but clearly, "I hope you think about this the next time you decide who belongs where." The woman didn't answer. A flight attendant at the door took her boarding pass and guided her out onto the jet bridge. The front door thudded shut behind them with a final echoing boom. For a few seconds, the cabin sat in stunned silence. Then, someone in row 3 let out a low whistle. Another passenger exhaled loudly, the sound halfway to a laugh. Reynolds turned back to Darius, the formality in his posture now laced with something else, something close to embarrassment. "Mr. Cole," he said, "on behalf of the crew, I'd like to apologize for what you experienced today. This is not the standard we aim for." "No," Darius said, "it's the standard you have, whether you aim for it or not. That's why I'm here." He set his briefcase down and looked past the captain at Turner. "You asked me to move, twice," he said, not accusing, just stating the record. "Did you ever ask her to consider that she might be wrong before you asked me to pay the price for it?" Turner's throat bobbed. "Sir, I was trying to keep the peace. We're trained to de-escalate." "By asking the person being pushed out of their place to step aside," he said. "I understand. That's the easy kind of de-escalation, the version that keeps the cabin quiet and the wound hidden." He let the words sit there, not twisting them into a lecture. The cameras would do that later. Reynolds cleared his throat. "We will be filing an incident report," he said. "You have my word it won't disappear into a drawer." "I know where the drawers are," Darius replied. "I'll be checking." He finally turned to the seat, his seat, 1A. The headrest cover still crisp, the pillow undisturbed, the little bottle of water waiting in its holder. It looked exactly like every other business seat, but now it felt heavier, freighted with everything it had taken to sit in it. He slid into the space slowly, setting his briefcase down, tucking his hoodie against the cool leather. A few scattered murmurs of "good for you" and "glad you stood your ground" floated forward from behind. He didn't turn around to acknowledge them. He didn't want applause. What he wanted was a world where this fight never had to happen. Turner moved down the aisle, cheeks still pink, offering pre-departure drinks with hands that shook just slightly. When she reached 1A, she hesitated. "Would you like anything before takeoff, Mr. Cole?" she asked. The honorific different now, less automatic, more careful. "Water," he said, "and later, a copy of the report you file. Use the real words, don't sand them down. If you say seating misunderstanding instead of told him to go to the back, then this flight is just another lie we tell ourselves." She nodded, eyes bright. "Yes, sir." As she walked away, the PA chimed. Reynolds' voice came over the speakers, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We had a delay related to a seating issue that has now been resolved in accordance with our policies. We'll be pushing back shortly." He paused, just long enough for the cabin to feel it. "And, as a reminder," he added, "every passenger on this aircraft deserves respect, no matter their seat number." The message was neutral enough for corporate, vague enough for anyone half listening. But for the people in the first few rows, and for the man in 1A, it sounded like the first small crack in a wall that had stood for far too long. By the time the wheels kissed the runway, the story had already left the plane. Darius felt the jolt of touchdown run up through the seat frame, a familiar vibration he usually associated with relief. Today, it felt like a starting gun. As the engines roared into reverse, screens lit up all around the cabin. Airplane mode flipped off. The invisible world outside flooded back in. Behind him, the teenage girl's phone chimed so fast it sounded like a ringtone. "Oh my God," she whispered, "it's already blowing up."
The young man in the navy sweater leaned forward, his screen angled just enough for Darius to catch a glimpse if he wanted to. A paused video filled the frame. Darius in his red hoodie, the woman in 1A, the captain standing between them. A caption screamed across the bottom. Platinum Karen tells black man to go to the back in first class, then finds out he owns the airline. He hadn't even left the seat, and the narrative had a name. Row by row, phones came alive with the same clip, reposted, recaptioned, reinterpreted in real time. Some versions zoomed in on the woman's face as she refused to move.
Others focused on him, voice steady as he said, "I'm done being the variable you adjust." A few had already spliced in commentary from users who hadn't been anywhere near the flight. As they taxied, notifications started to ping on his own phone, still in his pocket. He felt the faint buzz against his leg over and over. Board members, the communications director, journalists whose numbers he recognized, unknown numbers, probably reporters already circling. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin filled with the usual rustling, seatbelts snapping open, overhead bins creaking, passengers reaching for bags. But the energy was different, threaded with the electric hum of people realizing they'd been inside a story that was now spilling beyond them. The middle-aged black woman in the window seat caught his eye as she stood. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't move. My kids have seen that look 1,000 times. Maybe next time someone will think twice." He nodded. "I hope so." The teenage girl hovered by his row, clutching her backpack. Sir," she said, suddenly shy now that the moment had passed, I recorded some of what happened. If you want the video, I can airdrop it, in case, anyone tries to edit the story." There it was, the other side of the internet. Not just the mob, but the witnesses. "Send it," he said. He unlocked his phone, accepted the incoming file. "Thank you for not pretending you didn't see anything." She flushed. "My parents always say don't get involved, but I'm tired of watching this stuff and doing nothing." "So am I," he said. As the line shuffled forward, the young man in navy leaned in. "Mr. Cole, right?" he said. I Googled you when we landed." He winced apologetically. "You're a big deal." "I'm a man who wanted to sit in the seat he paid for," Darius replied. "The rest is just paperwork." The man huffed out a laugh. "Well, your paperwork is trending. The hashtag with your name is everywhere." He shook his head. "They're already calling you the undercover CEO." Of course they were. The internet loved a neat headline, a hero with a hook. He just hoped the story didn't flatten into a meme and lose the wound at its center. At the front of the cabin, Harris and Turner stood by the door, their usual disembarkation smiles replaced by something more sober. As Darius approached, Turner spoke first. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice low so the exiting passengers wouldn't hear. "We filed the initial report. I included exactly what was said. No softening." He searched her face, looking for defensiveness. He saw something closer to shame. "That's a start," he said. "The real work happens after the report." Harris nodded, tablet pucked under his arm like a shield. "We're expecting calls," he admitted, "from corporate, from the press. This isn't going to stay quiet." "It shouldn't," Darius said. He stepped aside to let an elderly couple pass. "If this only scares you because I'm the one it happened to, we've learned nothing." Reynolds emerged from the cockpit as the last few passengers filed out. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I've asked that operations route any inquiries about this incident to me first, until you decide how you want to address it." "Appreciated," Darius replied, "but this won't be controlled from one cockpit, Captain. This is already out there." He lifted his phone. The screen was a storm of messages, mentions, tags. The question now isn't whether people will talk, it's what we'll say back. He stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the air cooler, harsher. A gate agent straightened as she saw him, eyes flicking briefly to the word Cole on his briefcase. She'd heard then, or guessed. News traveled faster than luggage. In the terminal, the noise hit him, announcements blaring, rolling suitcases bumping, the distant hiss of espresso machines. But under it all, his phone kept vibrating, each buzz another reminder that his private audit had become a public reckoning. He paused by a window, watching another of his company's planes taxi to the runway.
Somewhere on board, a flight attendant was welcoming passengers, reciting the same script about comfort and safety, and valuing every guest. For the first time, he wondered how many times those words had floated over someone who'd just been quietly pushed to the back. He opened a message from his communications director. It was short, to the point. "We need to talk. This is everywhere, trending in 4 countries. What's our line?" Darius stared at the question for a moment, then typed back. "Our line is the truth. Schedule a crisis meeting, and clear the word misunderstanding from every draft." He hit send, slid the phone into his pocket, and headed for the exit, knowing that the fight for his seat was over. But the fight for what his airline stood for was just about to begin. The conference room looked like every other crisis room he'd ever sat in. Glass walls, 2 bright lights, a screen full of headlines. But this time, his own face stared back at him from half the articles.
A freeze frame of him in the red hoodie, hand on his briefcase. A still of the woman mid-sentence, mouth twisted around the word back. A wide shot of the captain between them. Captions varied, but the core stayed the same. Black CEO told to go to the back on his own airline. Undercover owner confronts racist passenger mid-flight. When the CEO is the victim, airline scandal goes viral. His executive team sat along the table, laptops open, phones buzzing on silent. The head of communications, Mara, had dark circles under her eyes. Legal looked like he'd aged 5 years since the landing. "Reach is over 20 million views across platforms in 12 hours, Mara said, tapping her tablet. "We're trending in multiple countries. There are calls for boycotts, but also people praising you personally. Some are demanding the passenger's name. Others are sharing their own stories. It's not slowing down." Stock dipped 3% at open, the CFO added. "Recovered a bit after the first wave of support posts, but the volatility is real. Our institutional investors are asking for a statement within the day." Legal cleared his throat. "We have to be careful how much liability we take on. The moment we admit systemic discrimination, we open ourselves to class actions, regulatory probes." Darius raised a hand. "We already have systemic discrimination," he said. "We don't need to admit it to make it real." Silence settled. No one argued. They'd all watched the raw footage, the full version, uncut. They'd heard the check-in agent redirect him, the woman's "you people," the repeated attempts to nudge him to the back for peace. "The usual playbook won't work," Mara said quietly. "We can't call this an isolated misunderstanding when your name is literally attached to it. People will see right through that." "Good," Darius replied. "Then we won't try." He stood, walked to the front of the room, and changed the screen from headlines to a blank slide. The empty white rectangle felt like a dare. "Here's what we are not doing," he said. "We are not sacrificing 1 passenger and 1 flight attendant as the explanation. We are not putting out a 'we value all customers' paragraph and hoping the storm passes. And we are not hiding behind legalese." Legal shifted in his seat. "With respect, that legalese keeps us from being honest," Darius cut in. "And honesty is the only thing that's going to save us any goodwill after this." He typed 2 words on the slide. "Dignity program." Mara frowned, curious. "We're naming it?" "We're committing to it," he said. "Publicly, visibly, specifically." He turned back to the table. "This isn't a PR band-aid. This is a structural overhaul. Here's what it means. Mandatory recurring training for every employee, from gate agents to executives, on bias, escalation, and what real de-escalation looks like when the person being mistreated refuses to disappear. Transparent reporting, quarterly publication of passenger complaints involving discrimination, with the outcomes. No more burying them in internal memos. A dignity audit of our procedures, from check-in scripts to seat assignment policies. Anywhere the easiest solution is move the black guy to the back, we change the system so that solution isn't available. The HR director raised a cautious hand. "That's significant. Culture doesn't shift because of 1 memo." "I'm not asking culture to shift because I said so," Darius replied. "I'm giving it a shock it can't ignore. This incident is that shock. We either use it or pretend it didn't happen and watch people walk away from us." Mara tapped her pen against her notebook. "We can frame the public statement around that," she said slowly. "Not just, 'we're sorry,' but, 'here's what we're changing and how you can track it.' People are already calling this a dignity moment. We could own that phrase, but not in a slogan way, in a measurable way." Legal exhaled. "If you put numbers out there, the press will use them against us when we slip." "We will slip," Darius said. "The point is to show we're watching ourselves. Right now, random teenagers with phones are doing a better job of holding us accountable than our own internal systems. That should embarrass us more than any headline." The room went quiet again. This time, it wasn't fear. It was the uneasy recognition of a mirror. "Okay," Mara said finally. "We draft a statement that acknowledges what happened as you experienced it. No euphemisms. We announce the Dignity program with timelines, not vague promises. And we position this not as 'our CEO survived racism and forgave us,' but as 'our CEO exposed a failure and here's how we're rebuilding.'" Darius nodded. "And we make it clear that this isn't about me. I was lucky. I had a camera, witnesses, and the power to make a phone call that people listened to. Most of our passengers don't. This program is for them." The CFO glanced at the screen. "This will be expensive." "So was buying this airline," Darius said. "So is losing trust." He took a breath, felt the weight of the choice settle in his chest. "Draft me a statement in the next 2 hours," he said to Mara. "Send it to legal to strip out anything that's reckless, not anything that's true. We'll film a video message for our channels tonight. I'll stand in front of our logo and say exactly what happened on that plane and exactly what we're going to do about it." "And the passenger?" HR asked softly. "People will want her name. They're already hunting." "We don't feed the mob," Darius said. "We protect our employees from becoming the story, even when they fail. We hold them accountable internally, and we protect their dignity too. That's the test. If our solution is just find a new villain, then we've learned nothing." He clicked off the screen. The word dignity vanished, but the echo of it stayed. "This started because one woman thought someone like me didn't belong in 1A, he said. "If we do this right, it ends with an airline where no one has to pass a belongs here test to be treated like a human being." No one clapped. This wasn't that kind of meeting. But as the team bent over their laptops, drafting, revising, building the framework of something that might actually outlive the news cycle, Darius felt the faint, unfamiliar sensation that maybe, just maybe, this ugly, viral moment could become more than a scandal. It could become a line in the sand. Months later, the airport looked different, but only if you knew where to look. The gold business and first-class priority sign was the same. The polished floors still reflected rolling suitcases and weary faces, but below the big letters, a smaller plaque had appeared in dark blue. Dignity promise. Every passenger, every seat, equal respect. Report violations instantly. People barely noticed it at first. That was fine. It wasn't meant to be decoration. It was a door handle. Sooner or later, someone would grab it. Darius stood a few steps back from the check-in counters, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the stream of travelers. This time, he wasn't in disguise. The hoodie was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and open-collar shirt. He'd come early, not for his flight, but to see something else. At counter 4, a young gate agent was facing a scene that looked uncomfortably familiar. A middle-aged man in a blazer leaned over the desk, voice clipped with entitlement. "I was told I'd be up front," he said. "You're not pushing me back because you overbooked. I don't care what your system says." The agent, knew enough that her name tag still squeaked when she moved, kept her shoulders squared. "I understand you're frustrated, sir," she said, "but the seat you're asking for belongs to another passenger. I can't take it from them. What I can do is—" "What you can do," he interrupted, "is fix this. I have status. My time matters." She opened her mouth, hesitated, then glanced at the small blue card clipped beside her keyboard. Dignity escalation. Don't move the victim. "No, sir," she said, a little louder. "What I can't do is solve this by asking someone else to pay for our mistake. That's not how we handle it anymore." The man blinked, thrown off his script. Darius watched the agent hold her ground, offer alternatives, refuse to turn the quietest person into the most flexible variable. It wasn't perfect, but it was new. He felt a small knot in his chest loosen. He turned away, heading for the lounge.
His flight was in a couple of hours. He'd promised the board he'd actually use the upgraded seating they kept budgeting for. The receptionist at the lounge door recognized him immediately now. There was no pretending to be anonymous when your face had sat on a million screens. "Good afternoon, Mr. Cole," she said, genuinely warm. "Welcome back." The lounge hummed with muted conversations and clinking glasses. Screens showed departure boards on one wall, business news on another. On one channel, a panel debated corporate responsibility and the dignity program his airline had rolled out. He ignored it. He spotted an empty armchair near the window and headed toward it, scrolling through an internal report on his phone. Complaints logged since the program launched, outcomes tracked, patterns beginning to shift. Halfway there, he stopped. She was sitting alone at a small table by the far wall, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Hair pulled back in a simple clip, jacket a little rumpled, makeup doing a poor job of hiding how little she'd slept. No pearls, no first-row blow. For a second, he almost turned away. They could go the rest of their lives like this, parallel lines in the same terminals, never crossing again. She'd become a warning in training sessions, a blurred figure in internal PowerPoints. He'd become the story everyone retold, but no one wanted to stand inside. Instead, he walked over. "May I sit?" he asked. She looked up, startled. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then dropped. Shame moved across her face like a shadow. "You can sit wherever you want," she said, quietly. "It's your airline." He couldn't tell if it was apology or accusation, maybe both. He took the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lounge noise faded to a dull backdrop. "I heard you filed a complaint," he said.
About how things were handled after the flight. Her mouth twisted. "I filed a lot of things," she said. "Complaints, explanations. My lawyer sent letters. For a while I thought I could fix the narrative, tell people I was pushed into a corner, that it was all a misunderstanding." She glanced up at him, then away. "The video didn't agree." "It usually doesn't," he said. She exhaled, the breath shuddering on the way out. "I lost contracts," she said. "Clients didn't want their brand anywhere near mine until the noise died down. My kids saw the clips. Their friends did too. I got messages from strangers telling me to disappear, or worse." He let that sit. "I don't condone that," he said. "What you faced online, that's not justice. That's just a different kind of mob." She gave a humorless little laugh. "You're the last person who needs to tell me about mobs." He nodded. "Maybe, but I want you to hear me say it. I never asked for your name to be released. I told my team we weren't feeding that machine." "I know," she said. "My lawyer told me, said it might help if anyone ever asked what kind of man you are." Her eyes met his then, steady if still raw. "I came here today to ask you something," she said. "Not for my seat back, not for my reputation. That's gone, at least for a while." She swallowed. "I wanted to ask if you hate me." The question caught him off guard more than any insult she'd thrown at him on the plane. He thought of the cracked sidewalk from his childhood, his mother's tired hands, the bus driver who closed doors on them. He thought of every quiet room where someone smiled and still slid the opportunity to someone else. He thought of her voice in row 1, "Move to the back, boy." And then he thought of the blue signs now hanging under his logo, the training sessions, the young agent at the counter refusing to move the victim. "No," he said slowly, "I don't hate you." She blinked, clearly unprepared for that. "I hate what you said," he continued. "I hate that you saw me and decided I was the adjustable part of your day. I hate that my staff were ready to agree. But hate you?" He shook his head. "I don't have time to carry that much of you around." Something in her posture loosened, just a little. "So that's it?" she asked. "You forgive me and we call this a teachable moment?" "No," he said. "Forgiveness isn't a press release. You faced consequences. You'll carry that. My crew faced consequences too. I'm not erasing any of that because we happened to run into each other in a lounge." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I don't want this story to end with you as a monster and me as a mascot, he said. That's too easy. The truth is, you were one person doing what the system quietly told you could do, and what the people around you were ready to tolerate. She flinched, remembering the faces turned away, the silence in row 2. I'm changing the system, he said. What you do with yourself is up to you. She studied him for a long moment. You really believe an airline can change how people think? She asked. No, he said, but it can change what they're allowed to get away with at 30,000 feet. And sometimes that's where the thinking starts. A boarding call echoed faintly through the lounge for another flight. Darius checked his watch, then stood. I don't need anything from you, he said. Not a public apology, not a statement. Live your life, raise your kids better. That's between you and them. He picked up his briefcase, then added, but if you ever fly with us again and find yourself in 1A, I hope you'll look at whoever walks past in a hoodie and think, he belongs here until proven otherwise, not the other way around. She nodded, eyes bright. That's fair, she said. More fair than I was to you. He gave a small, tired smile. The bar was low, he said. As he walked toward the exit, he passed another of the blue plaques on the lounge wall. Dignity isn't an upgrade, it's standard. He hadn't written that line, but he'd approved it the moment he saw it. It was the simplest way he knew to say what the whole storm had taught him. First-class seats were limited, status tiers were limited, lounge access was limited. But dignity, if his airline did its job right, wouldn't be. And somewhere on a future flight, when a passenger looked at another human being and started to say, move to the back, maybe they would stop, hear an echo of this story, and realize there is no back on a plane built for everyone's worth to travel at the same altitude.